Before stone cities rose above the jungles, before kings carved their names in stele, before the pyramids pierced the sky with their steps, the Maya looked upward. For above the ceiba trees and the canopy of green, the heavens were alive. Clouds gathered, roared, and broke, sending torrents upon the earth. Lightning struck, thunder echoed across valleys, and rain descended like the breath of gods. In those waters they saw not chaos but a will, not storm but spirit. And they gave him a name, Chaac. He was not one but many. He was 4 brothers, for aspects, for storms, each ruling a corner of the world. To the east he rose red as dawn, bringing the first light and the first rains. To the north he gleamed white as lightning, sharp and unrelenting. To the west he sank golden as dusk, carrying the promise of return. To the south he stood black as the depths of night, heavy with the water of storms. Together they encircled the earth, keepers of balance, guardians of the cycle. Yet even as 4 he was one, the storm-given flesh, the cloud-given voice. His eyes were circles of thunder, his mouth breathed lightning, his weapon was the hacha, the thunder axe that split the sky and unleashed the rain. With it, he struck the clouds and they broke open, pouring water upon the thirsty maize. With it, he shattered mountains, calling rivers from their stone prisons. With it, he defended life against drought and death. The Maya believed he lived not only in the sky but also in the sacred waters of the cenotes, those deep wells where the surface breaks and the underworld opens. There his breath lingered in mist, his tears glimmered in droplets, his power slept until called by ritual. When thunder rolled across the jungle they whispered, "Chaac walks. Chaac awakens." Thus, from the first rains to the first maize, from the first cenote to the first offering, the Maya knew this truth. Life itself was Chaac. The voice of Chaac was thunder, and the Maya learned to hear it as men learned to hear the words of their fathers. When thunder rolled softly across the sky, it was promise. Rains approaching, seeds swelling, the breath of maize. When thunder cracked sharp and sudden, it was warning, storms fierce enough to break huts and flood fields. When thunder roared long and unending, it was hunger, Chaac demanding offerings before he would break the sky and release the waters. The lightning, too, was language. A single bolt across the horizon was a sign of blessing. A flash of the god's eye turned kindly upon his children. But when the night sky split with forked fire, when bolt followed bolt and the heavens raged with unending light, then the Maya trembled. For then Chaac was at war, striking not only clouds but demons of drought, the enemies of rain that lurked unseen in the high winds. Every drop of rain was his gift, but also his judgment. Too little and the maize withered. Too much and the rivers drowned the fields. Thus the people learned that worship of Chaac was not fear alone but balance. They gave to him not only prayers but blood, not only incense but life, for only in sacrifice could balance be kept. And so, each rumble of thunder became liturgy, each flash of lightning a verse, each rainfall a blessing that bound the people to their God. The jungle itself seemed alive with his presence. Frogs croaking in chorus at his coming, birds scattering at his roar, the earth itself drinking deeply of his gift. To live in the land of the Maya was to live in dialogue with Chaac. To plant without him was death. To worship without him was folly. To forget him was unthinkable. Thus the whisper of clouds became a covenant. Chaac would bring life, but only if man remembered him. Long before the great temples of Chichen Itza rose, before the cities of Palenque or Uxmal carved the faces of gods in stone, The people of the Maya knew that Chaac demanded more than reverence of the tongue. He demanded offerings, for water is life and life must answer to life. It began in the simplest way. Farmers, looking to the sky, raised bowls of water and poured them upon the ground, whispering, "Drink, Lord of clouds. As you drink, so too shall the maize drink." At first, these were humble gestures, a handful of maize, a clay figure cast into the cenote, a prayer spoken beneath the first drops of storm. But with each generation the rituals grew, becoming as complex as the cycles of rain itself. At the heart of these rites were the cenotes, those vast natural wells that broke the limestone earth and plunged into darkness. To the Maya they were more than water. They were mouths of the underworld, the places where Chaac listened most closely, for in their depths slept the breath of storms. On days of drought, the people gathered at the edge of the cenotes. Priests painted their faces blue, the color of sky and water. They carried incense of copal, its smoke rising in white plumes that mirrored the clouds. Drums beat like the pulse of thunder, slow and heavy, echoing over the surface of the water. The offerings began with food: maize, cacao, honey, fruits, cast into the depths as symbols of plenty returned to their source. Then came jade and gold, treasures given not to adorn but to appease. But in times of great need, when the earth cracked and the maize withered, greater sacrifices were made. Warriors, slaves, and sometimes children were adorned with feathers and paint, their bodies carrying torches as they were lowered into the darkness. They vanished into the sacred waters, becoming gifts to Chaac, messengers to the storm. To modern eyes it may seem cruel, but to the Maya it was covenant. Life for life, blood for water, breath for rain. Without Chaac the world would starve. And so, when thunder answered and the sky broke open, when rain fell upon thirsty earth, the people knew their gifts had been accepted. In these rituals the entire village participated. Women prepared the offerings, weaving garlands of flowers. Children carried torches to light the path. Farmers stood in silence, their faces lifted to the clouds. Even kings humbled themselves, pouring libations into the waters, acknowledging that their power was nothing without the god of rain. The cenote became a temple without walls, its waters a mirror of the sky, its depths a bridge between worlds. To cast an offering there was to throw it not into water but into eternity. Thus were the first rituals of Chaac born. Echoes of thunder made flesh, prayers of maize and blood, ceremonies that bound the people to the storm. The Maya did not see the rain as random. To them, the movement of clouds was a procession, a journey that mirrored their own rituals upon the earth. They spoke of Chaac walking the sky. At dawn he rose in the east, red with the light of newborn fire. His steps carried him across the heavens at noon, his body gleaming white, his voice rolling in thunder. At dusk he sank into the west, cloaked in golden shadow, leaving the sky heavy with memory. At night, he descended into the cenotes and rivers, resting in the underworld, his breath lingering as mist above the waters. Thus, each day and each year were reflections of his eternal journey. The planting season began with his awakening, the harvest ended with his rest. His cycle was not only celestial but earthly. The farmers saw his steps in the sprouting of maize, in the swelling of rivers, in the croak of frogs and the dance of fireflies. The jungle itself spoke with his rhythm. Priests studied the sky with unceasing vigilance. They watched the shapes of clouds as others read books. A cloud in the form of a serpent meant Chaac was near, slithering through the sky. A cloud shaped like an axe foretold lightning. A crown of clouds around the sun meant the god was preparing his storm. Every sign was read, every whisper heeded, for in the language of clouds lay the future of the people. Festivals arose to mark these passages. When the first rains fell after the dry season, the people danced barefoot upon the wet earth, their laughter joining the roar of thunder. They painted their bodies with blue spirals, imitating lightning, and raised clay effigies of Chaac, decorated with shells and jade. Fires burned copal resin, filling the air with sweetness, as voices chanted prayers to welcome the god of clouds. The rituals of rain became the very rhythm of existence. To live was to wait for Chaac, to appease him, to thank him. Without him, the world was dust. With him, it was abundance. He was not distant, not abstract. He was the breath in the air, the water in the cenote, the storm above the trees. And so, in the whisper of clouds, the Maya heard not only weather but will, not only storm but soul. The Maya did not see thunder as noise, nor lightning as accident. To them, each storm was a war, and every bolt of fire was a weapon wielded by Chaac in his eternal struggle against the forces of drought. For there were enemies older than men, older than maize, older even than the mountains. These were the demons of heat and thirst, the spirits of dryness that sought to choke rivers, to harden the soil, to wither the seed before it rose. The Maya spoke of them as shadows that dwelt in the high heavens, lurking in the places where the sun burned too fiercely and the wind carried no water. They were not given gentle names, for they were not to be appeased. They were to be struck, broken, scattered. And Chaac was their destroyer. When the storm clouds gathered, the people of the jungle whispered that Chaac had risen to war. His body was the cloud, dark and heavy. His voice was the thunder, rolling in anger. His weapon was the hacha, the lightning axe, forged of stone and fire. With each strike he split the sky, rending the veils of drought. With each roar he drove back the shadows of thirst. The lightning was his blow. The thunder was the echo of his shout. The rain was the blood of his enemies, falling in rivers to feed the earth. The Maya imagined these battles as vast and unending. Sometimes Chaac fought alone, his body flashing across the sky in single strokes of lightning. Other times his brothers, the 4 Chaacs of the directions, joined him, striking from east, north, west, and south. When storms raged for days, when lightning split the sky again and again, it was said that the battle had grown fierce, that the enemies of life had risen in great numbers, and that Chaac fought with all his strength to drive them back. In these moments the people prayed more fervently. Priests raised their arms toward the storm, chanting words that echoed the thunder. Farmers cast maize into the fire, hoping to strengthen the god's hand. Children were taught to be silent when thunder roared, for the sky was at war, and no human voice should interrupt the battle of gods. Thus each storm was not only weather but miracle. Each rainfall was not only water but victory. And each harvest was proof that Chaac had triumphed once more. To the Maya, survival itself was witness to his eternal war. Without his battles, the earth would wither, rivers would dry, the maize would crumble to dust. But because he fought, life endured. Because he struck, the world was nourished. And so, every clap of thunder became the hymn of a warrior god, every bolt of lightning the blaze of his eternal weapon. The weapon of Chaac was not merely a tool but a symbol of cosmic power. The Maya called it the hacha, the stone axe of fire, both sacred and terrible. In their stories, it was given to him at the dawn of creation, when the first clouds were born and the first rains fell. The axe was double-edged. One side gleamed with fire, the other with stone. With fire, it split the heavens, unleashing torrents. With stone, it struck the earth, opening rivers and cenotes. In his hand it was not only a weapon but a key that unlocked the water hidden in sky and soil. When lightning flashed, the Maya said, "Chaac has thrown his axe." They imagined it hurtling through the heavens, shattering the clouds, releasing the rains bound within. When thunder rolled, they said, "The axe has struck." And when the rain poured, they whispered, "The wounds of the sky bleed life." The axe was so sacred that its image was carved in temples and painted in codices. Priests carried small replicas of it, crafted from flint and obsidian, and during rituals they struck these against stone to imitate thunder, to call the god to battle. Sometimes they hurled burning torches into cenotes, believing the fire would transform into lightning in the hands of Chaac. The axe also bound heaven and earth. For when it struck the ground, it was believed to open paths between worlds. Cenotes, caves, and rivers were seen as the scars of the god's blows, each one a reminder that water was released only through struggle. Even the maize itself was said to have sprouted from such strikes. Chaac split the earth with his axe, and from the wound the first stalk rose. But the axe was more than creation. It was also justice. When men forgot their offerings, when arrogance grew in kings, when the people neglected the rites, Chaac's axe became punishment. Lightning would strike temples, huts would burn, floods would rise. The god was not cruel, but he was never silent. His axe was a reminder, balance must be kept. Thus, to see lightning was not only to marvel at the power of nature. It was to witness the hand of Chaac, the warrior god, splitting heaven and earth so that life might endure, or punishing those who forgot the covenant of rain. The Maya did not only watch Chaac's battles in the sky, they echoed them upon the earth. For every storm was both a cosmic war and a sacred drama that demanded reflection and ritual. When the season of drought lingered too long, when the clouds refused to break and the maize curled pale and brittle in the fields, the priests proclaimed the rites of thunder. From villages and cities, the people gathered, their faces painted blue with the sacred color of rain, their bodies marked with spirals to imitate lightning. The procession began at dawn. Drummers beat the skin of jaguars stretched tight, the sound rolling like distant thunder. Flute players trilled high and piercing, like the whistle of the wind before rain. Shell trumpets bellowed deep, like the voice of storm across valleys. Together they wove a symphony of sky, calling Chaac with music that was not mere sound but invocation. In the center of the procession walked the priests. Their headdresses bore feathers of the quetzal, shimmering green like the jungle after rain. In their hands they carried axes of flint, each one glinting with firelight. With every step they struck them against stone, sparks flashing into the air. These sparks were not only light, they were miniature lightnings, earthly reflections of the god's weapon, reminders that man could mimic the thunder but only Chaac could command it. At the heart of the ritual stood the cenote, the sacred mouth of the underworld. Around its rim, fires burned copal resin, thick smoke curling upward like the breath of clouds. The people encircled it, chanting, their voices rising and falling with the rhythm of the drums, until the air itself seemed to tremble with the sound. Offerings began with food and jade, cast into the depths. But when drought bit hard, when the earth cracked like the lips of the thirsty, greater sacrifices were demanded. Chosen ones, painted with sacred blue, were adorned with feathers and flowers, their bodies shining with oil. They were not seen as victims but as envoys, messengers to Chaac, carrying the prayers of the people into the very depths of his dwelling. Lowered into the cenote, torches in hand, they vanished into the water. Silence followed, broken only by the chant of the priests and the echo of drums. And then, as if in answer, the sky would darken, the wind would shift, and thunder would roll. The people lifted their arms in exultation. Chaac had heard. These rituals did not imitate the storm. They were the storm. In their music, in their fire, in their sacrifice, the Maya became part of the cosmic battle, joining their god in his eternal war against drought. The power of Chaac was not only felt in fields and cenotes. It ruled the very heart of Maya politics. Kings were not only rulers of men but mediators with the gods. To govern was to ensure reign, for without rain no throne could stand, no dynasty could endure. When drought struck, the people did not curse the sky alone. They questioned the king's favor with Chaac. A ruler who failed to bring rain risked rebellion, for he was seen not merely as unlucky, but as estranged from the covenant of the storm. Thus, kings made Chaac central to their reign. On stelae and temples, they carved themselves striking with axes like lightning, their bodies adorned with spirals of water and flame. In ceremonies, they bled themselves, letting their blood fall upon the earth as rain falls from the sky, proving that they too joined in sacrifice. In festivals, they danced as Chaac himself, wielding the axe, stomping upon the earth like thunder, raising torches like lightning. Their authority was not only political but elemental. They were the earthly reflection of the storm. And always in the background the maize fields waited. For every ritual, every sacrifice, every proclamation of divine favor had but one measure: the harvest. When Chaac answered with rain, the maize rose tall and green, its stalks thick, its ears full, its kernels golden. The people rejoiced, praising both their God and their king. Temples rang with music, and offerings of gratitude were cast into cenotes. But when the rains failed, when Chaac turned silent and the earth cracked, famine came. Then songs turned to wails and kings trembled, for the people would demand proof that the bond with Chaac still held. In this way, every storm became a mirror of power, every drop of rain a crown upon the head of rulers. Chaac's battle in the heavens was also the battle of kings upon the earth. Both fought against drought, both bore the burden of survival. The storm was not only nature. It was order, justice, and destiny. And so, in the whisper of clouds and the roar of thunder, the Maya heard not only the voice of their God, but the echo of their own lives, fragile, dependent, yet bound to eternity through ritual, sacrifice, and maize. The Maya said that without Chaac there was no maize, and without maize there was no man. For in their creation myths, humanity itself was born not of stone nor clay, but of corn, the flesh of white and yellow kernels, the blood of water, the breath of divine wind. Maize was not only food. It was body, memory, lineage. To eat was to commune with the very essence of existence. Yet maize could not live without water. And so, the bond between men and Chaac was deeper than worship. It was survival. Each seed buried in the soil was a prayer to him. Each sprout breaking the earth was his answer. Each harvest was the seal of covenant renewed. When the first rains fell upon dry earth, the farmers knelt, pressing their hands into the softened soil, whispering thanks to Chaac. They called him guardian of maize, for it was his axe that split the clouds, his rains that nourished the roots, his storms that defended the fields from the spirits of drought. The cycle of planting and harvest became a mirror of Chaac's own cycle in the sky. When he walked in the east, rains returned, seeds awoke. When he strode overhead, maize grew tall and strong. When he sank into the west, the harvest was gathered, and the people feasted in gratitude. When he descended into the underworld, the earth lay bare, awaiting his return. But covenant demanded balance. If the people forgot him, if they grew arrogant in abundance, if they withheld offerings, then Chaac withheld his rains. The maize withered, fields cracked, hunger spread. And in that silence, the people understood their place. They were not masters of the earth, but stewards under the watch of storm. The maize was thus not only food but pact. Each kernel was reminder of Chaac's gift, each stalk a monument to his battles in the sky. To eat was to honor him, to waste was to insult him. In every meal, his presence was invoked, for the god of rain had breathed into the flesh of men. Thus, through the maize, Chaac was not only in the storm but in the blood of humanity itself. Chaac was more than sky. He was the bridge uniting the three great realms of the Maya cosmos: heaven, earth, and the underworld. From the heavens he struck with lightning, splitting the sky so that rain might fall. From the earth he raised maize, feeding men and beasts alike. From the underworld he rose from the cenotes, carrying with him the waters that connected the realm of the dead with the breath of the living. Thus he was never bound to one place. He walked the clouds, but he also moved through rivers, lakes, caves, and wells. His voice echoed in thunder, but also in the croak of frogs, the hiss of snakes, the cry of birds that heralded rain. He was everywhere balance was needed, everywhere water and life touched. The cenotes were his doorways. The Maya believed that when they cast offerings into those sacred wells, they did not sink but traveled, passing into the underworld into the hands of Chaac himself. The rains that followed were not random, but the god answering, lifting water from one realm into another. Each storm was thus not only weather but communion between worlds. In ceremonies, priests painted Chaac with serpents curling from his mouth, for the serpent was the path of rain, winding from sky to earth. They adorned him with shells, for the sea was his womb. They gave him eyes wide and circular, for he was ever watchful, gazing from every horizon. In this way he was not only a god of rain, but a cosmic mediator, standing between realms, ensuring that the cycle of life continued unbroken. To the Maya, this meant that every storm was also a reminder. Life was fragile, balance delicate, existence itself dependent upon unseen battles and sacred pacts. Chaac was not simply benefactor. He was guardian, and his gift was never free. The people walked beneath the whisper of clouds, knowing that they lived upon a fragile thread. The rains could vanish. The drought could return. The maize could fail. And yet, as long as Chaac fought in the heavens and answered in the cenotes, life endured. Thus, at the close of every cycle, they turned again to him, pouring incense into the sky, blood into the soil, and gifts into the waters. For Chaac was storm but also covenant. He was terror but also blessing. He was destruction, but above all, he was the bridge between men and eternity. When the dry winds rose and the earth cracked beneath the sun, the Maya did not see mere weather. They saw war. For in their world, every storm was a battlefield, every thunderclap a war cry, every bolt of lightning a strike from the god of rain. Chaac did not dwell in peace. He was eternal struggle. His realm was the sky, and within it lurked ancient foes, spirits of drought, serpents of fire, demons of dust and silence. These were no simple metaphors but living presences to the Maya imagination, entities that threatened to swallow the rivers, to drink the cenotes dry, to choke the breath of the maize. When the horizon darkened with clouds, the people whispered, Chaac goes to battle. The storm front was his army gathering. The winds were his march. The lightning was his weapon drawn. His very body swelled across the heavens, a colossus woven of vapor and flame, his eyes burning in circles of light. The battle began with silence. Clouds gathered, heavy and dark, like warriors assembling before combat. The air grew still, trees ceased their movement, animals fled into the jungle. Then came the first flash, a bolt of white fire, jagged and swift, splitting the sky. It was Chaac's axe raised high, striking the first blow. The thunder that followed was his roar, deep and rolling, shaking valleys and mountains alike. It was not mere sound but proclamation. The god had entered the field and the struggle had begun. In that moment all life paused. Farmers left their tools, priests lifted their arms, children hushed their laughter. For what unfolded above was not a storm, but a sacred war upon which their survival depended. If Chaac triumphed, the rains would come, the maize would rise, life would endure. If he faltered, the drought would spread and famine would follow. Thus, every storm was a drama of existence, a clash where gods decided the fate of men. The enemies of Chaac were not vague shadows but shapes the Maya knew well. They called them the serpents of drought, beings of fire and wind who slithered across the sky, devouring clouds before they could break into rain. These serpents were imagined with mouths wide enough to swallow rivers, with tongues of flame that scorched the earth. Their bodies coiled through the heavens, black and burning, leaving trails of heat that lingered as days of merciless sun. They thrived in silence, for silence was death to the maize. They fed upon stillness, for stillness was the enemy of rain. Chaac alone could face them. Armed with his thunder axe, he leapt among the clouds, striking blow after blow. When lightning flashed, the Maya said it was Chaac splitting a serpent's scales. When thunder rolled, it was the cry of the beast as it writhed. When the rain fell, it was the blood of the serpent, spilled to nourish the earth. The battles were fierce, and not all ended in triumph. There were times when the serpents prevailed, when weeks passed without storm, when the rivers thinned and the maize shriveled. In those days the people wept, and the priests cried out in supplication, "Chaac, return! Strike again! Do not let the serpents consume the sky." To aid him they performed rituals of mimicry. Warriors painted their bodies with serpent scales, dancing in circles as if to draw the enemy down. Priests struck flint against stone, sending sparks upward as offerings of lightning. Children carried bowls of water to cenotes, pouring them in as symbols of the rain to come. In this way the people joined Chaac's war, small allies to a god, their voices rising with the thunder. And when at last the rains came, when Chaac struck true and the serpents scattered, the people danced upon the wet soil. Their songs echoed like frogs after rain, their laughter like the patter of drops upon leaves. They knew they had not merely survived weather, they had witnessed victory. The storm was battle, the rain was triumph, and the maize that grew was the covenant sealed in blood and water. When the skies turned black not for hours but for days, when lightning split the heavens again and again, and when thunder shook the earth without rest, the Maya knew the battle was no longer waged by one alone. It was not a solitary struggle of Chaac against drought. It was the gathering of his brothers, the 4 Chaacs of the Rumbos, united in war. Each Chaac bore the color and essence of his realm. From the east, the red Chaac rose with the light of dawn, his axe blazing like fire at sunrise. From the north, the white Chaac descended, cold and sharp as lightning itself, his strikes swift and merciless. From the west, the black Chaac arrived, cloaked in the shadows of dusk, wielding storms heavy with rain. From the south, the yellow Chaac roared, golden as maize and fertile earth, bringing torrents that soaked the soil to its roots. Together they formed a circle around the world, each one guarding his quarter, each one striking in harmony. When storms raged across the jungle with winds that toppled trees and rains that drowned the earth, it was said the four brothers were fighting side by side, their blows falling in unison, their voices shaking the firmament. The people saw these storms not as disaster but as awe. To them, destruction was proof of the ferocity of the battle. When roofs were torn from huts, when rivers overflowed, when lightning set fire to the forest, they whispered, "The Chaacs are victorious. The enemies of rain are broken." And when the storm finally ended, when silence returned and the clouds scattered, the earth was left cleansed, glistening, fertile. Pools formed where dust had been, frogs sang from every corner, and the maize drank deeply of the gift. The people gathered what the storm had spared, and they gave thanks, not in sorrow for what was lost, but in reverence for what was won. For survival was never easy. It was the price of war. And every ear of maize, every drop of water, was a trophy from the battlefield of the gods. The Maya did not stand idle during these tempests. They read the storm as one reads sacred glyphs, for in every cloud, in every flash, in every roll of thunder there were signs. Priests climbed the temple steps and watched the sky with painted eyes. They saw in the fork of a lightning bolt the hand of the god raised in warning. They heard in the rhythm of thunder the voices of Chaac's enemies, crying out in defeat or triumph. They read in the direction of rain, whether it fell heavy to the east or gentle to the west, the omen of seasons to come. The common people too knew these signs. When lightning struck a tree, it was marked as sacred, a scar left by the god's axe. When thunder echoed thrice in succession, it was a sign of abundance. But if the sky remained silent after the first flash, it was dread. The battle was still undecided and famine might yet come. Children were taught from their earliest days to listen to storms not with fear but with reverence. The gods are speaking, their mothers whispered as thunder rolled. Hear their voices, for our lives depend on them. Thus, even the youngest learned that the storm was not noise but scripture, written upon the sky in fire and sound. At times, the priests proclaimed festivals after great storms, declaring them victories. The people would gather, feasting on maize and cacao, painting their bodies with water spirals, dancing to drums that mimicked the thunder. They sang not only to Chaac but to the storm itself, for the storm was not only his weapon but his very being. Yet there were also times of mourning. When lightning struck and killed a man, or when floods swept away a village, the people did not curse Chaac. They said instead, "He has taken what is his." For they believed that even death in storm was part of the covenant, part of the price of life. The storm was gift and terror, blessing and judgment, never one without the other. Thus, each storm became both revelation and riddle, a message from Chaac, a vision of cosmic war, a reminder that life was woven not in silence but in thunder. Among all storms, there were some that the Maya feared above others. Not the passing rains, not even the long tempests of the four Chaacs, but the great cyclones that rose from the sea and devoured earth and sky. These, they said, were not storms but wars of eternity, the huracanes. The very word carried dread, for Huracan was the one-legged god of storm and chaos, a force older even than Chaac. He was not rain nor balance but fury, wind unchained, destruction without measure. When he stirred, the seas rose in mountains, the trees bent as if bowing to invisible hands, and the sky became a whirl of darkness without end. Chaac, Lord of Thunder, could not ignore such a challenge. When the hurricane rose, he too ascended, his axe of lightning blazing against the spiral of wind. To the Maya, the hurricane was the greatest battlefield. Chaac striking again and again, thunder clashing with howling wind, lightning cutting through walls of rain. The people witnessed these wars from their huts, trembling. Roofs tore away, rivers overflowed, fields drowned. Yet even as destruction fell, they whispered, "The gods are fighting." They saw in the spiraling winds the coils of Huracan, in the lightning the strikes of Chaac, in the endless thunder the clash of wills. When the storm passed, silence fell heavy. Villages lay broken, trees uprooted, maize fields ruined. Yet amid the ruin, pools of fresh water glistened, and the soil, though scarred, was rich again. Survivors gathered the remnants, weeping for the dead but giving thanks for life. For they believed that in these wars, balance was restored at a terrible price. Thus, the hurricane was not only disaster, it was revelation. It showed the people that even gods fought among themselves, that creation and destruction were twins, that life itself was born in the clash of powers. And in their fear they saw truth. Man was fragile, yet part of this eternal storm. Chaac was not always gentle bringer of rain. He was also judge, wielder of punishment when men forgot the covenant. The Maya believed that abundance could corrupt. When the harvest was plentiful and the people grew careless, when kings boasted of power without honoring the storm, when villages ate maize without pouring libations, Chaac's patience withered. Then his axe became not gift but sentence. Lightning would strike temples, burning roofs of thatch. Floods would rise suddenly, sweeping away fields. Sometimes drought followed abundance, a silence in the clouds as if Chaac had turned his back. Each of these was punishment, not cruelty but correction, a reminder that the god was not servant to man but master of balance. Priests interpreted these punishments with solemn care. If a temple burned, they declared, "Chaac demands greater offerings." If floods came, they said, "Chaac cleanses the earth of arrogance." If drought lingered, they whispered, "We have forgotten his name and he has withdrawn." In these times, entire cities gathered for rituals. Kings bled themselves, cutting their ears and tongues to offer their blood as rain upon the earth. Slaves and captives were cast into cenotes, carrying prayers into the depths. Even children were sometimes chosen, their innocence believed to soften the heart of the storm. And when at last rain returned, the people wept with relief, swearing never to forget again. But memory is fragile, and abundance returns with arrogance. Thus the cycle repeated: gift, forgetfulness, punishment, repentance, renewal. Chaac was not cruel. He was just. His axe fell not in wrath but in judgment. To live under his sky was to accept that every gift bore responsibility, that every harvest was also covenant, and that no man, no king, no city could escape the eye of the storm. Thus the Maya learned that their lives were measured not only by maize and time, but by balance, and Chaac was both giver and guardian of that balance. For the Maya, the war of Chaac in the heavens was not only to be watched in silence. It was to be mirrored on earth. In their cities and villages, when the clouds gathered black and the first roll of thunder shook the air, the people began their own dance of the storm, a ritual drama meant to unite them with the god's struggle. At its heart was music, for thunder itself was rhythm. Drums boomed like rolling skies, struck not gently but with force, until the very ground trembled. Conch shells roared with deep, guttural cries, imitating the moan of wind through valleys. Flutes shrieked high, piercing like lightning, their notes jagged, unpredictable as though fire itself sang through hollow bone. Men painted as Chaac entered the circle. Their bodies were daubed in spirals of blue and white, symbols of rain and lightning. On their heads they bore headdresses of feathers, long and curling like storm clouds. In their hands they carried axes of stone and torches of fire, symbols of the god's thunder axe. Around them moved others dressed as serpents, long bodies of cloth painted with scales twisting and coiling through the crowd. These represented the enemies of rain, the drought serpents that devoured clouds. Their movements were sudden, menacing as they hissed and struck at the dancers of Chaac. The battle unfolded in rhythm. The Chaacs raised their axes high, striking sparks from flint against stone, while the serpent dancers recoiled, twisting upon the earth. Flames flared, drums quickened, the entire village roared in unison, until the performance was no longer mere theater but invocation. The people did not imagine they were watching Chaac's battle. They believed they were joining it. Children imitated frogs, hopping in circles, for the frog's croak was the herald of rain. Women raised bowls of water, sprinkling droplets into the air, their voices chanting invocations that mingled with the cries of the men. Even the elders swayed, clapping stones together in mimicry of thunder. At the climax, the serpent dancers collapsed, their bodies writhing upon the ground. The Chaac dancers struck their axes down, sparks leaping in the night. In that moment, the crowd erupted with a single cry, "Chaac!" And as if the heavens answered, rain often began to fall, sudden and fierce, drenching the dancers, extinguishing their torches, completing the union of ritual and storm. To the Maya this was not coincidence. It was proof. The people and their god were bound in the same battle, their dances and sacrifices joining his blows above. Every drop of rain was shared victory, every harvest the fruit of a war fought together. Thus, the dance of the storm was not entertainment but covenant, the people's reminder that they too were warriors beneath the god of thunder. The presence of Chaac did not vanish when the drums grew silent or the rituals ended. He lived in the daily breath of the Maya, his war mirrored in their fields, their politics, their very conception of justice and fate. Farmers read the sky each morning as others might read scripture. The tilt of a cloud, the shimmer of heat upon the horizon, the sudden flight of birds, all were messages from Chaac. If clouds thickened in the east, they prepared their fields, knowing rain approached. If the sky burned white without shadow, they stored water, whispering prayers for patience. Their labor was not blind effort but dialogue with the storm. In politics, kings claimed to be chosen of Chaac. When thunder rolled during a ceremony, they proclaimed it as divine approval, proof that their reign was blessed. Conversely, when drought struck, enemies of the throne used it as weapon, accusing rulers of having lost the god's favor. Wars among men were justified as reflections of wars in the sky. If Chaac fought serpents, so too must kings fight rivals. Even law and punishment bore his shadow. If a man swore falsely and lightning struck near, it was taken as judgment. If floods swept away a village after negligence in rites, it was considered divine justice. Chaac was thus not only storm but conscience, his axe punishing arrogance and falsehood as surely as it split the clouds. And in every home, his presence was remembered in small acts. Women sprinkled water on the hearth before cooking, whispering his name so the maize would be blessed. Children were taught to stay silent during storms, out of respect for his battle above. Hunters paused when thunder rolled, laying their weapons upon the ground, acknowledging that all killing, even of animals, belonged within the greater balance Chaac guarded. The storm was thus not an event but a condition of existence. It entered every decision, every ritual, every fear, every hope. Chaac's war was not distant, fought in skies beyond reach. It was lived daily in soil and water, in rule and rebellion, in life and in death. In this way the Maya world was a world of thunder. And within it, man was not separate from the storm, but participant in its eternal rhythm. The Maya did not believe that creation began in silence. For them, the world was not born in stillness, but in thunder. At the dawn of time, when the earth was formless and the sky heavy with unbroken waters, it was Chaac who raised his axe and split the heavens. With his first strike, lightning carved light into darkness. With his second, rain poured forth, filling rivers, lakes, and seas. With his third, the earth itself cracked, and from the wound rose maize, the flesh of man. Thus, creation was not gentle birth, but battle. The storm was womb and war alike, the chaos from which order was born. And at its center stood Chaac, warrior of beginnings, wielding the storm as both weapon and tool. Legends told that when he struck the primordial mountain, four rivers burst forth, flowing to the four corners of the earth. Each was guarded by a Chaac of its own color, red, white, black, and yellow, the guardians of the directions, each bearing the essence of creation in his flow. From those rivers came not only water but life, fish, frogs, turtles, and birds, whose voices still echo the music of the storm. In another tale, the first maize lay hidden deep in stone, locked away by the spirits of drought. For ages men starved, unable to feed themselves. Then Chaac descended with his axe, striking the mountain until it cracked open. From within spilled golden kernels, scattering across the earth, planting themselves in soil watered by his rain. In this way the god was not only warrior but benefactor, provider of the substance from which men were made. Even fire itself was said to come from Chaac. For when lightning struck trees, flames leapt forth, teaching men to cook, to forge, to survive the night. Fire was thus not theft, as in the tales of other peoples, but gift, a fragment of Chaac's own axe entrusted to humanity. In all these myths, the message was clear. Every gift was born in struggle, every blessing paid for by battle. Chaac's war was not curse but creation. Without thunder there was no light. Without rain no maize. Without the storm no life. Thus, the Maya looked to the sky not with fear but with reverence. The crack of thunder was not reminder of chaos past, but echo of creation eternal, repeating itself in every storm. Though centuries passed, though kings rose and fell, though cities flourished and crumbled back into the jungle, Chaac's war never ceased. His voice still rolls across the mountains, his fire still splits the sky, his rain still nourishes the fields. For the Maya, this was proof that the cosmos itself was never still. Creation was not event but process, renewed each time Chaac raised his axe. Every storm was a reminder that the world was fragile, dependent, held together only by the god's unending struggle. When thunder cracked over the temples, it was as if Chaac himself walked among the stelae, inspecting the offerings, judging the faith of kings. When lightning struck the ceiba tree, sacred axis of the world, it was his hand reaffirming the link between heaven, earth, and underworld. When rain poured into the cenotes, it was his covenant renewed, his gift sealed once more. The people understood, Chaac would never rest. His enemies, drought, fire, silence, were eternal, and so his battle must also be eternal. They saw in this not despair but hope. For as long as thunder rolled, Chaac still fought. As long as rain fell, he still triumphed. As long as the storm raged, life endured. Even today, when lightning flashes over the jungles of Yucatan, when thunder shakes the stones of ruined temples, when rain floods the sacred wells, his presence lingers. The frogs still croak in chorus at his coming, the clouds still whisper his march, the maize still drinks his gift. The Maya who survive still whisper his name, still cast offerings into water, still know that their lives depend upon his endless war. Chaac never ceased. His storm never ended. For the world itself is his battlefield, and mankind its witness. In the lands of the Maya the earth was not whole. Beneath the jungles of ceiba trees and the temples of kings, the ground opened in dark wounds, deep wells of water, their surfaces gleaming like mirrors, their depths plunging into unseen worlds. These were the cenotes, sacred portals to the underworld. To ordinary eyes they were water-filled caves. To the Maya they were mouths of the earth, places where the skin of the world had split and revealed its blood. Water, the lifeblood of Chaac. In these depths, men saw reflections of the sky above. Clouds drifted upon their surfaces, stars shimmered in their darkness, and when rain fell, the ripples carried heaven into the underworld. The cenotes were not simply sources of water. They were altars. They were temples without walls, sanctuaries older than stone. To cast an offering into a cenote was not to throw it away, but to return it to the gods, to let it fall into the hands of Chaac himself, who dwelled within their depths. Silence ruled around these sacred wells. Even the loudest warriors hushed their voices at the rim, for echoes carried strangely within, as if the underworld itself was listening. Priests burned copal resin, its white smoke curling into the air, a bridge between the surface and the hidden world below. The people approached with reverence, their feet bare, their offerings cradled as if holding infants. Some cenotes became centers of pilgrimage. Entire cities rose around them, their temples aligned with the water's edge, their processions descending stone steps into shadow. There the people whispered prayers not to the sky but into the abyss, knowing that Chaac listened from beneath. For the Maya, rain came not only from above but from below. Chaac's battle was fought in the sky, but his gift was stored in the underworld, in rivers that flowed unseen, in chambers of water that connected cenotes like veins beneath the earth. To give to the cenote was to awaken those veins, to let Chaac rise and break the sky with his axe once more. Thus the cenotes were not wells. They were wounds of the cosmos, doors of offering, thresholds between life and death. Among the rites to Chaac, none carried greater weight than the descent into the cenote. For it was here that the covenant between man and storm was sealed with gifts, prayers, and sometimes with life itself. The rituals began with preparation. Days before, priests purified themselves with fasting and water. They painted their faces blue, the color of rain, and drew spirals upon their skin, symbols of lightning. Children sang hymns at night, their voices rising to the stars, so that Chaac might already hear the echo of worship before the offering was given. At dawn the procession began. Drummers walked first, their rhythms deep and slow, imitating the heartbeat of the storm. Behind them came women bearing bowls of maize, cacao, honey, and flowers. Men carried jade beads, obsidian blades, and golden ornaments, shimmering like drops of sunlight meant to descend into the dark. At last came the chosen ones. Sometimes they were captives, taken in war, their bodies adorned with feathers and paint, torches in their hands. Sometimes they were maidens, their garments white, their hair braided with flowers. At other times they were children, not offered in cruelty but in faith, their innocence believed to soften the god's heart. At the rim of the cenote chants rose. Copal smoke drifted over the waters, mingling with mist. The priests raised their arms, calling upon Chaac with words older than memory, Lord of Thunder, drink of our gift. Break the sky, bring the rains, let maize grow tall again. Then one by one the offerings were cast into the abyss. Bowls sank, jewels vanished in ripples, flowers floated briefly before dissolving into shadow. And when sacrifice was demanded, the chosen ones were lowered, torches blazing. Their cries mingled with the chants, then with the silence of water closing. The people did not see death but passage. The cenote was no grave but a doorway. Those who descended became messengers, carrying prayers into the realm of Chaac, returning life to the earth through their offering. When thunder rolled days later, when rain fell heavy upon the soil, the people wept with joy. Their sacrifices had been heard. Chaac had accepted their gifts. The maize would live. Thus, the ritual of descent was not cruelty but covenant, a dialogue in blood and water, a pact between storm and man, sealed in the depths of the cenote. For the Maya, the cenote was not a pit of darkness, but a throne room. When the priests cast offerings into its depths, they were not abandoning wealth, nor extinguishing life. They were sending gifts to the very hands of Chaac, who ruled the waters below as he ruled the clouds above. Every sacrifice was a negotiation. The people did not believe they could command the storm. They knew no mortal could. But they believed they could plead, persuade, remind. The jewels glimmering in the cenote were like words spoken in light, telling Chaac of the beauty of the earth. The bowls of honey and cacao were sweetness offered to sweeten his temper. The blood was strength given in exchange for rain. The priests taught that life and water were bound by the same thread. Water is the blood of the earth, they said, and blood is the water of man. When men bled into the cenote, they gave back what Chaac had given them, completing the circle. This understanding turned sacrifice into covenant, not cruelty. The chosen were not abandoned but entrusted, believed to journey into the God's presence. Their descent was mourned, yes, but also honored. Their names were spoken with reverence, remembered as those who crossed the threshold and carried the voices of the people into the storm. When the rains came after such offerings, the people did not speak of coincidence. They proclaimed it as answer. The storm was Chaac's reply, thunder his acceptance, rain his signature upon the covenant. And so, every sacrifice was validated by the harvest it secured, every death redeemed in the life of the maize. Thus, the cenotes became not graves, but contracts in stone and water, binding men and gods in an exchange as old as creation. When great ceremonies were held for Chaac, the night itself became a stage of myth. The people gathered long before the moon rose. Fires burned along the rim of the cenote, their light flickering across the black water, where stars reflected as if the heavens had descended. Smoke of copal rose in white plumes, sweet and heavy, drifting upward until it vanished among the branches of ceiba trees. Drums began softly like distant thunder, then grew louder, echoing across the jungle. The air trembled with their beat. Flutes sang like the whistle of wind, and conch shells roared like waves against stone. Together, the music wove the fabric of a storm before the storm, not chaos but invocation. Processions came forth. Children carried bowls of flowers, scattering petals into the water, their laughter subdued into solemn silence. Women bore offerings of maize and cacao, balancing them with reverent care. Warriors carried torches, their faces painted as lightning, their bodies gleaming with oil, sparks flying with every motion. Priests walked last, their voices chanting the names of Chaac, their steps measured as if pacing the rhythm of thunder itself. The chosen sacrifices stood adorned with feathers and jewels, their bodies painted blue. Their eyes reflected fire and water at once, the living embodiment of the covenant. Some sang hymns as they approached, their voices trembling but proud, for they knew their path led not to death but to transformation. When the moment came, silence fell. The drums ceased. Only the whisper of wind and the crackle of fire remained. The priests raised their arms, speaking the final invocation, "Chaac, Lord of Thunder, hear us. We return what is yours. Give us your rain, your gift of life." Then the offerings were cast. Jewels vanished into shadow. Bowls broke upon the water's surface. Flames hissed as torches were lowered. And when the chosen ones descended, the air filled with gasps and chants, until the water closed and the abyss claimed them. Afterward, music rose again, louder than before, as if to carry the souls upward to the clouds. The people danced, their bodies drenched in sweat and smoke, their movements mirroring lightning across the night sky. Above them, the heavens darkened, as if Chaac himself leaned closer to listen. And often before dawn, thunder rolled. The first drops fell heavy and blessed. The people lifted their arms, laughing and crying, letting the rain soak their skin. The covenant was sealed once more. Fire had met water, man had met God, and life would continue. The cenotes were not only places of ritual in the present, they were also vessels of memory. Every object cast into their depths remained hidden, preserved in the still waters and limestone walls. To the Maya, this was not loss but permanence. Each jade bead, each obsidian blade, each bone or drop of blood was a word inscribed in the language of eternity, carried not upon stone but upon water. Priests often spoke of the cenotes as books without pages, libraries that only Chaac could read. When they gazed upon the surface, they saw not only their own reflection but the reflection of countless offerings beneath, invisible yet present. To them, each ripple was a whisper of what had been given, each shadow a reminder of prayers spoken generations before. The people believed that offerings never vanished. What entered the cenote did not sink into oblivion but passed into Chaac's hands. And though it disappeared from mortal eyes, it continued to exist in the divine realm, part of a growing treasury that testified to the faith of humanity. Legends told of priests who dreamed of these treasures beneath the waters. Vast halls where Chaac stored the gifts of mankind. Piles of jade glowing like green fire, golden ornaments gleaming like trapped sunlight, and countless vessels filled with maize, honey, and blood, awaiting his command to return as rain. This vision gave the people hope. For if their sacrifices endured, then so too did their voices. Nothing was wasted. Nothing forgotten. The cenote was not merely an abyss but an archive of devotion, a place where the past spoke endlessly into the present. And so, when new offerings were cast, they joined an unbroken chain stretching back through centuries, each gift linking the living to their ancestors, each prayer echoing the chorus of countless voices that had risen from those same waters before. It was said that the cenote spoke. In the silence of night, when the jungle slept and the moon cast pale light upon the waters, strange sounds drifted from their depths, echoes, murmurs, whispers carried upward like voices of the dead. The Maya believed these were not illusions but messages. The souls of sacrifices sent into the underworld sometimes returned with answers, their voices rising through the cenote to speak to the living. Priests would sit at the rim, listening intently, their ears trained to catch the faintest murmur, interpreting them as signs of Chaac's will. When the waters lapped gently against stone, it was said the god was pleased, promising rain soon to come. When the surface rippled without wind, it was a warning of imbalance, a sign that offerings must be renewed. If a stone thrown into the cenote echoed longer than expected, it was believed the underworld had opened its mouth wider, hungry for more gifts. Children were warned never to play at the edge, for the cenotes were not merely holes in the earth but living beings, awake and watching. To fall in by accident was not misfortune, but a sign that Chaac had chosen a messenger. Thus, even tragedy was woven into the fabric of covenant. The wells also carried sound in strange ways. A voice spoken at one edge could be heard across the water, magnified and transformed. Priests used this phenomenon in ritual, calling out Chaac's name and hearing it returned, as though the cenote itself answered. This echo was sacred, a dialogue between man and God, thunder and whisper. Over time, these experiences deepened the aura of mystery. The cenotes became not only places of offering, but living mouths of prophecy, wells where time itself echoed, where past sacrifices whispered to present ears, and where Chaac's presence could be felt in the chill of the water, in the resonance of sound, in the silence that followed prayer. For the Maya, to stand at a cenote was to stand at the border of worlds. The world of the living, the world of the gods, and the world of the dead, all three speaking through the dark water. Each year, as the seasons turned, the Maya gathered at the cenotes in great festivals, binding their lives to the rhythm of Chaac's storm. For water was not merely survival but sacred time itself, and the cenotes were its calendar. The most solemn of these festivals came at the turning of the dry season, when the land ached for the first rains. The people prepared for days. Villages emptied as families journeyed to the sacred wells, carrying bundles of maize, jars of honey, cages of birds, and baskets of flowers. Kings arrived with their retinues, adorned in plumes and jade, their authority proclaimed not only in words but in gifts to Chaac. At dawn the ceremonies began. Drums rolled like distant thunder. Priests painted in blue led processions down carved steps toward the water, their chants rising in cadence with the beat. Frogs were released, their croaks joining the chorus, for their voices were seen as heralds of rain. Children scattered petals, their laughter subdued into ritual, their hands carrying the innocence of new beginnings. At the climax of the festival, the king himself stood at the rim. He bled his own flesh, piercing his ears or tongue, and let drops of blood fall into the cenote. The people roared in reverence, for the king was not only ruler but mediator, offering his life as symbol of the covenant that bound the city to its God. Then came the sacrifices. Painted blue, adorned with feathers, chosen ones were given to the waters, their descent accompanied by flares of fire and clouds of incense. Each life carried was a plea, each gift a promise. The waters closed, swallowing them, and the crowd erupted in chants that shook the jungle. When thunder followed, rolling from horizon to horizon, the people danced in joy. They believed the god had heard, and that soon the rains would break. The festival was not mere spectacle but the heartbeat of survival, the moment when man and storm met in sacred dialogue. Year after year, generation after generation, these festivals bound the Maya to their cenotes, their god, and their maize. In their memory, the cenotes did not hold darkness but celebration, the echo of countless voices rising in unison, crying out for life. The cenotes were not only linked to agriculture but to the very rhythm of the heavens. For the Maya, time was sacred, and its cycles were written not only in maize and rain but in the stars. Priests studied the sky with tireless devotion. They marked the rising of Venus, the path of the sun, the movement of constellations. These signs told them when Chaac would awaken, when the rains would come, when offerings must be renewed. Their calendars were not abstractions but instruments of survival, aligning ritual with storm. The cenotes became the earthly mirrors of these celestial patterns. Many were aligned with temples and pyramids so that at solstice or equinox, the sun would rise directly above their waters, filling them with firelight. In those moments, the people saw the heavens reflected below, believing that sky and underworld touched, united through the cenote. Festivals were timed to these alignments. When Venus shone bright before dawn, the people gathered, for they believed it was the herald of Chaac's coming storm. When the sun cast its light into the cenote at midday, the priests proclaimed it as the god's eye gazing upward from the depths. Every star, every planet, every ray of light was woven into the ritual, binding the order of the sky to the flow of water. This union of astronomy and agriculture made the cenotes more than natural wells. They were cosmic clocks, marking the dance of stars and storms alike. To draw water from them was not only to drink, but to touch time itself, to partake of a cycle older than kings, older even than maize. Thus, the cenotes stood at the center of existence. They were not only places of ritual but anchors of space and time, where man stood at the crossroads of heaven, earth, and underworld, hearing the voice of Chaac in thunder, seeing his eye in lightning, and drinking his blood in sacred water. Each cenote was not only a well of water, but a well of memory. The Maya knew, or rather believed with certainty, that what was given to Chaac never disappeared. Objects sank, bodies vanished beneath the ripples, but their essence remained. The priests taught that the cenote remembered. Every drop of blood shed into it, every jewel that fell through its depths, every life offered in faith became part of a growing chorus, an invisible weight of devotion resting at the bottom. When the people approached, they were not coming alone. They were joining all who had come before. Thus, every ritual was layered upon centuries. The child scattering petals into the water was repeating the act of ancestors long gone, his laughter joining echoes beneath the surface. The king bleeding into the cenote was renewing the oath of rulers carved into stone centuries before. Even the humblest villager casting a handful of maize was not merely feeding the waters, but feeding into an eternal covenant, shared across generations. This memory made the cenote not only sacred, but personal. Villages spoke of their wells as if they were elders, keepers of history. They whispered of the offerings hidden beneath, tales of jade from ancient kings, bones of long-forgotten warriors, voices that still prayed in silence. Some claimed that during storms, when lightning struck the water, they could see brief flashes of those treasures below. A gleam of gold, a flicker of bone, a ripple carrying voices from the underworld. To drink from a cenote was thus to drink from the past, to take into one's body not only water but memory. Children were told, "This water has touched the lips of our ancestors. It carries their voices, their faith, their covenant. When you drink, you join them." And so, the cenotes were not only places of sacrifice, but wells of identity. They bound the living to the dead, the present to the past, the people to the God who watched over both. Because of the cenotes, the Maya did not see themselves merely as dwellers upon earth. They saw themselves as children of water and thunder. Their flesh was maize, born from seeds split open by Chaac's lightning. Their blood was water, flowing like rivers from the cenotes into their veins. Their breath was wind, stirred by the storms that rolled across the jungle. Every part of their being reflected the gifts of the storm. The cenotes became the symbol of this truth. They were not only physical sources of water but mirrors of the soul. To look into their depths was to see oneself reflected beside clouds and stars, a reminder that man stood between heaven and underworld, suspended like the ripple upon the surface. Priests declared that as the cenote bound sky to earth, so too did Chaac bind man to the cosmos. He was not distant, not aloof. He was present in every heartbeat, every harvest, every storm. To forget him was to forget one's own nature. To honor him was to live in harmony with existence itself. Thus, the people saw themselves as participants in the eternal war of the storm. Each farmer planting maize was echoing Chaac's battle against drought. Each child laughing in the rain was celebrating the god's victory. Each elder offering prayers into the cenote was strengthening the bond between worlds. In this way, the cenotes were more than places. They were identities, mirrors of what it meant to be Maya. To stand at their edge was to remember, we are born of water. We live by rain. We are children of Chaac. And so, with every storm, with every whisper of thunder, with every drop of rain that struck the earth, the Maya heard not only the voice of a god, but the echo of their own origin. In the beginning the world was barren, and men were not yet formed. The land lay in silence, cracked by drought, empty of sustenance. Then Chaac struck the earth with his axe of lightning, and from the wound rose the first stalks of maize. But maize was fragile, tender as a child, easily withered by sun and thirst. It needed a guardian, and so came Chaac, lord of the fields, protector of wild and cultivated plants. The Maya spoke of these two not as rivals but as brothers in covenant. Chaac was storm, Chaac was seed. Chaac was the voice of thunder, Chaac was the whisper of stalks in the wind. Chaac opened the heavens, Chaac opened the earth. Without one the other was powerless. When Chaac split the sky, rain descended into the soil, and Chaac welcomed it, guiding each drop into the roots of maize. When Chaac raised the stalk high, Chaac watched from above, guarding it with clouds, striking down pests and serpents with bolts of fire. Together they formed the covenant that sustained life. The Maya saw this covenant in every stage of the plant. The seed was placed in earth as if in a tomb, waiting for Chaac's rain to awaken it. The sprout was the child of both gods, tender and green, fragile yet blessed. The stalk rising tall was the proof of balance, strong and golden. And the ear of maize, bursting with kernels, was the body of man himself, flesh born of storm and soil alike. Thus, every harvest was not only an act of agriculture but a liturgy, proof that the gods had kept their pact. And every failure of maize was a warning that balance was broken, that offerings must be renewed, that Chaac and Chaac must be reminded of the people's devotion. The covenant was not eternal by itself. It had to be fed, with prayers, blood, and gratitude. Without this, the gods would turn silent, and the fields would return to dust. So the people lived between two powers, storm and maize, Chaac and Chaac, rain and seed. And in that balance, humanity found its place. The planting of maize was never a simple act of labor. It was ritual, ceremony, covenant renewed each season. At the end of the dry season, when the first rains whispered upon the horizon, farmers gathered their families. They carried seeds in gourds, painted with glyphs of fertility. Before touching the soil, they prayed to Chaac and Chaac, asking that the storm and the seed join once more. The priest or elder cut his skin, letting drops of blood fall upon the first seed. This blood was not sacrifice but kinship, a mingling of human life with the life of maize. Then, with solemn gestures, the seed was buried in the soil, covered gently with earth, like a child laid in a cradle. As each furrow was planted, songs were sung. The women sang of clouds, asking Chaac to return. The men sang of stalks, praising Chaac for his guardianship. Children ran barefoot, scattering petals, laughing as if to remind the gods of the joy of life they were protecting. After planting, a feast was held. The people ate tamales, drank cacao, and shared stories of past harvests. But at night, when silence fell, they turned their eyes to the stars. Priests read the sky, ensuring the seeds had been sown in harmony with celestial cycles. For if maize was body and rain was blood, then the stars were destiny. All three had to be aligned for life to flourish. In the days that followed, the people waited. They watched the soil for the first green shoots, listening for the croak of frogs, watching the horizon for clouds. Each sprout that broke the earth was greeted with joy, for it was proof that the covenant still held, that Chaac had answered, that Chaac had embraced the gift. Thus, planting was not toil but prayer, not labor but ritual. The furrows of earth were altars, the seeds were offerings, the rain was blessing, and the maize that grew was life itself. The jungle exhaled with the breath of dawn. Mist drifted between the ceiba trees like wandering spirits, and the first cries of parrots broke the silence of night's dominion. Beneath this canopy, where time moved like the flow of rivers, two divine powers approached one another. Chaac, Lord of Rains, strode with the weight of storms in his steps. His eyes were pools of turquoise lightning, his hands gripped the Chaac, the double-headed axe that split the sky. Around him, the air trembled with the scent of ozone, and droplets of water followed in his wake, as though the earth wept wherever he passed. From the eastern grove came Chaac, the youthful spirit of maize and the living soul of the harvest. His hair shimmered golden as ripened corn, his skin held the soft brown of fertile soil. Wherever his feet touched, green shoots stirred from the ground, small blades of promise reaching toward the sun. His presence carried no thunder, no flame, only the quiet assurance of growth, the hum of cicadas, the whisper of roots drinking deep. They met at the sacred clearing where sky kissed earth. Chaac's voice broke first, a low rumble, half thunder, half sorrow. Brother of maize, I have seen your children cry. The stalks bend, the fields crack. Without my rains, your gift withers into ash. Without you, my waters drown in vain, unshaped, unguided. Why have we not bound ourselves as earth and storm were meant to be? Chaac tilted his head, his youthful face neither arrogant nor afraid. His words were soft, yet in them lay the patience of all harvests. Because men forget, O Lord of Thunder. They take from me without gratitude, and they call for you only when their throats burn with thirst. They know the fruit of my body but forget the price of tending. They welcome your rains yet curse your storms. What covenant can be forged with the unfaithful? For a moment, silence weighed heavy. The air thickened, the forest animals withdrew, sensing that God spoke in tongues older than stone. Chaac lifted his axe, and the sky above darkened. Clouds rolled in, their bellies heavy with withheld rain. Then let us bind them, brother. Not with mercy alone, nor with famine alone, but with balance. Let maize grow only by the measure of rain, and let rain fall only by the measure of toil. If they forget either of us, they will perish. If they honor both, the cycle endures. Chaac studied him for a long while, then reached into the soil. From the earth he pulled a single maize stalk, still green, its leaves trembling in the storm breath. He held it aloft, and the husk split open to reveal golden kernels glistening like drops of sunlight. "This is my heart," Chaac whispered. "It feeds the children of men. But it cannot live alone." Chaac lowered his axe, and a drop of rain fell upon the kernels, swelling them, making them gleam as if alive. "And this," said Chaac, "is my heart. It quenches the dust, awakens the seed. But it is nothing without the womb of earth." Thus, in that sacred clearing, the two gods pressed their gifts together, maize and rain, seed and storm, and the first covenant was sealed. From that union came the decree: men would live only if they remembered the bond of water and earth, storm and harvest. They would pray at cenotes, cast offerings into the deep, and burn copal at the edges of the fields. Their labor, their gratitude, their blood if need be, would keep the covenant alive. Generations later, the Maya still remembered. At the beginning of each planting season, when the fields lay bare and the first rains threatened the horizon, the villagers gathered at the temple of Chaac. Drums echoed like distant thunder, while conch shells cried out to summon the gods. Children scattered maize kernels across the altar, each kernel shining in torchlight like a captured star. Women carried baskets of tortillas, fresh and steaming, as offerings of gratitude for past harvests. But the most sacred moment came when the high priest raised a clay vessel painted with glyphs of lightning and maize. Inside it, water drawn from the cenote shimmered with reflection of the flames. The priest lifted it high and proclaimed, "By the covenant of Chaac and Chaac, by rain and maize, by storm and seed, life returns to the earth. Let the waters fall, let the stalks rise, let the covenant never break." The vessel was poured upon the earth, and all knelt in silence. Somewhere above, thunder growled in approval. And soon as days turned, rains descended. The soil drank deeply, and tender shoots of maize pierced the ground, green against the dark loam. It was said that every droplet was a tear of Chaac, every sprout a smile of Chaac. But men are fragile, and memory is a fleeting servant. In years of plenty, when the granaries swelled and tortillas were abundant, some forgot the old rites. They said, "The rains come of their own accord. The maize grows by its own strength. Why offer prayers? Why shed blood?" The gods watched. One year, when forgetfulness spread like a shadow, the rains came late. The clouds gathered, yet turned away. The fields cracked once more, and hunger returned like an old enemy. The elders trembled, for they knew. They lit fires, they called the people, they cast offerings of jade, of food, even of life into the cenote's dark throat. And when the screams of sacrifice faded into silence, the heavens at last wept. Rain fell in torrents, drowning despair, awakening life anew. And the people remembered, without Chaac the seed is dust, without Chaac the rain is meaningless. It was said that after the covenant, Chaac and Chaac met each season at the threshold of dawn. The rain god would strike his axe upon the clouds, releasing the waters, while the maize god would lift his stalks from the ground in answer. And men, caught between storm and soil, lived not as masters but as keepers of the bond. The covenant endured, not in stone alone nor in blood alone, but in every tortilla shared by a mother, in every child laughing beneath the rain, in every stalk of maize that bent under the golden weight of harvest. Thus the Maya whispered, "The gods do not give freely. They give in balance, and balance is the breath of the world. In the heart of the world, where the skies bend to kiss the earth and the jungle grows thick with roots that remember more than men, the eternal covenant was born." Chaac, the storm, wandered restless among the clouds, carrying in his hands the axe that splits the heavens and commands the rivers of the sky. He was the sound of thunder echoing across valleys, the flash that illuminated the Saba's crown, the unseen weight that pressed upon men's bones when storms prepared to break. Yet his waters, mighty and infinite, remained without purpose when they fell upon barren soil. Without seed, without root, without the sacred body of maize, his rains were tears lost upon stone. Far below in the soil, Chaac stretched his roots in silence. He was the green rising, the gold ripening, the slow heartbeat of the earth that never ceased. Maize was his flesh, the stalks his limbs, the kernels his blood. He was the hidden patience beneath every field, the promise that the people of maize would endure as long as he breathed. But when the sky withheld its waters, he too withered. His gold turned pale, his stalks bent, his gift turned hollow. Without the storm, he was silence, an empty promise fading into dust. The world trembled in those days, for gods do not exist in isolation. They are balanced, they are covenant, they are cycles bound together. And so it was revealed that the rain without the maize was vain abundance, and the maize without the rain was brittle hunger. Thus, in a clearing where the jungle opened to the sky, storm met earth, and a pact was forged that would bind not only gods but also the fragile children of flesh who depended on them. The covenant was sealed not with words but with essence. Rain descended upon kernels of maize, swelling them into golden jewels, and the maize, in turn, offered its body to the storm as vessel of meaning. From that moment, no drop of water would fall without stirring a seed, and no seed would rise without the tears of the sky. It was decreed in silence, but it became eternal law, that men would survive only as long as they remembered this balance. The rains would come in rhythm with the sowing, and the sowing would flourish only with the blessing of rains. To neglect one was to betray both. To betray both was to invite famine and ruin. This was not mercy, it was balance. For the gods were not givers of gifts but guardians of cycles. And cycles are sacred. The turn of seasons, the rising and setting of suns, the endless dance between death and rebirth. The covenant of maize was not an act of love, but of necessity, a truth woven into the bones of the world. From that day forward, the Maya people carried the covenant in their flesh, for they themselves were born of maize. In the sacred stories, their bones were ground from kernels, their blood mixed with water, their breath carried by the wind of storms. They were not separate from the pact. They were the living embodiment of it. Each planting season, the memory returned in ritual. The fields, bare and waiting, were consecrated by fire and smoke. Copal was burned, its fragrance rising like a bridge between earth and sky. Kernels of maize were scattered upon the ground, not yet seeds but promises. Water from the cenotes, drawn from the hidden veins of the underworld, was poured into the soil as offering. The priests raised their arms to the heavens not to command but to remind. For the covenant did not bind gods to man, it bound man to gods, forever dependent, forever indebted. And so the rains fell and the maize rose. Each stalk was not merely a plant but a sacred pillar, a sign that the pact endured. Every ear harvested was a fragment of divinity, consumed with reverence, For to eat maize was to eat the body of a god, and to drink water was to taste the tears of the storm. Yet men are creatures of memory and forgetfulness. In times of hunger they remembered with devotion, their altars heavy with offerings, their cenotes echoing with prayers. In times of abundance they grew careless, their rituals fading into habit, their gratitude turning hollow. They looked upon full granaries and clear skies and said, "This is our doing." But the gods are eternal witnesses, and balance cannot be deceived. In years of arrogance, the rains hesitated. Clouds gathered but did not break. The fields cracked once more and the covenant trembled. Then the people remembered too late that their survival was not their own making. They returned to the cenotes with jade, with copal, with food, and when hunger deepened, even with life itself. Human hearts sank into the dark waters, gifts for Chaac, reminders that flesh was born of maize and thus belonged to maize and rain alike. And the skies, appeased, opened once more. Thunder rolled, lightning split the heavens, and rain descended in torrents, soaking the forgotten covenant back into human memory. The maize rose again and life returned as it always did, through the cycle of remembrance and forgetting, devotion and neglect. Thus it was and thus it remains. Maize and rain, Chaac and Chaac, bound in covenant eternal. They do not exist apart, for one without the other is void. And the people, born of maize and sustained by water, live only so long as they honor both. Every tortilla, warm in the hands of the hungry, carries the breath of the storm. Every drop of rain striking the earth awakens not only the soil but also the memory of ancient promises. And every cenote, deep and shadowed, whispers of sacrifices past, of offerings cast into the dark to ensure the covenant endures. The covenant of maize is not merely a pact of gods. It is the very rhythm of existence. It is the heartbeat of fields swaying beneath the sky, the endless rise and fall of life between earth and storm. It is the reminder that survival is not victory but balance, not dominion but humility. And so, in the depths of the jungle, beneath the Saba's vast crown, the covenant of Chaac and Chaac still breathes. For as long as rain falls and maize rises, the pact endures, eternal, unbroken, carved into the soul of a people who are themselves children of the gods. The covenant of maize did not remain only in the realm of gods, sealed in the clearing of creation and whispered through the movements of storm and soil. It sank into the roots of the world, binding itself into the veins of stone and the hidden arteries of water beneath the earth. The cenotes, dark mirrors to the underworld, became the wombs of this promise. Each drop that fell into their depths carried memory, each reflection of the sky upon their still surfaces bore witness to the ancient pact. The Maya looked into those waters and saw more than their own faces. They saw the truth of their origin, that flesh and spirit were woven from maize and sustained by rain. The cenotes were not only sources of water but openings into the bones of the earth, sacred thresholds where the covenant revealed itself most clearly. To stand at their edge was to feel the presence of Chaac's breath upon the water, to hear the whisper of Chaac in the rustle of surrounding foliage, to sense the weight of both gods pressing upon the hearts of mortals. When the first shoots of maize appeared after planting, the people did not celebrate only the coming harvest. They celebrated the renewal of the covenant itself. The trembling green stalk was not merely a plant but a sacred sign, proof that the balance had been upheld for another cycle. As long as the shoots rose, life endured, and the gods remained present. And yet, every stalk also carried within it a warning. that without proper remembrance, without offerings returned to the cenotes and rituals performed at the right moments, the covenant could weaken and famine would return. Thus, each generation inherited not only fields of maize but also the weight of duty, for their very survival was a ritual enacted upon the earth. The rituals that honored the covenant were not simple acts of devotion. They were the very mechanics of existence, the threads that held the cycle together. In the plazas of great cities, where pyramids rose like mountains of stone, priests climbed to summits with vessels of water, maize and copal. Their bodies were painted with the colors of rain and fertility, their headdresses heavy with feathers that symbolized the sky's reach. From those heights, they offered smoke to the heavens, letting it curl and drift until it disappeared into the vast blue, carrying with it the essence of remembrance. But the true heart of the rituals was not found in plazas or temples. It was found in the cenotes, those liquid eyes of the underworld. At their edges, offerings were cast, jade that shone like captured lightning, figurines carved from stone, food prepared in sacred kitchens, and in times of deepest need, blood. Each gift was swallowed by the dark water, descending into silence where gods listened without words. The cenote became the altar of the covenant, the vessel through which human hands returned fragments of their world to the divine. It was said that when the offerings fell into the depths, they became transformed. Jade turned into lightning in Chaac's hands, maize became the golden breath of Chaac, copal smoke curled through unseen caverns until it emerged again in the clouds. Even human sacrifice was not seen as loss but as continuation, as if the body returned to the very substance from which it had been formed. The cenotes became thresholds, where what was given did not vanish but ascended or descended into new form, feeding the cycle that men could not see but upon which their lives depended. And so ritual became life and life became ritual. Each planting season, each harvest festival, each offering cast into the deep was not only a request for survival but a reaffirmation that the covenant remained intact. The covenant of maize was not bound to words, nor to objects, but to the very geography of the Maya world. The ceiba trees, tall and immense, with their roots plunging into the underworld and branches reaching into the heavens, became living symbols of the pact. They stood at the center of villages, markers of cosmic balance, reminders that life extended in all directions, above, below, and across. To see a ceiba rise against the horizon was to be reminded of the bond between Chaac and Chaac, between storm and soil, between water and seed. Mountains too bore the weight of covenant. From their slopes flowed streams that watered fields, and upon their summits clouds gathered before descending as rain. The people looked upon these mountains as resting places of the gods, places where Chaac struck his axe to awaken the sky and where Chaac whispered the renewal of growth. Every feature of the land, river, cave, plain, was an echo of the eternal promise. The maize fields themselves were sacred texts written upon the earth. Their rows, straight and ordered, mirrored the paths of stars. The ears that grew heavy with kernels were not mere food but offerings of the land itself, shaped by the covenant into vessels of divine sustenance. Each harvest was both an ending and a beginning, a death of one cycle and the rebirth of another. In this way the entire world became a temple. Every sound of rain upon leaves, every rustle of stalks in the wind, every reflection in cenote waters was part of the liturgy. The covenant did not belong only to priests or kings. It belonged to every child who ate maize, every farmer who bent his back to sow, every mother who ground kernels into masa. The people lived inside the covenant, carried it in their blood, and passed it forward through their labor and their rituals. Yet men are fragile, bound by hunger and memory that fades like smoke. When famine struck, they remembered with desperation, offering all that they could. When abundance returned, their devotion waned, and arrogance crept into their hearts. They forgot that their survival was not their own making but the fulfillment of an ancient balance. The covenant endured not because men were faithful, but because the gods were eternal. The rains could vanish for seasons, the maize could wither, but eventually the cycle would return, reminding humanity of its dependence. Every drought was a punishment, every flood a warning, every storm a reminder that the balance must not be ignored. The people lived not by mastery over the world but by surrender to its rhythms. In their forgetting, men revealed the true nature of the covenant. It was not a gift to be accepted or rejected at will. It was the very foundation of life, inescapable and relentless. To live was to participate in the covenant, whether by gratitude or by suffering. The gods did not demand faith in the manner of men. They demanded balance, which would reassert itself no matter how deeply mortals strayed. And so the covenant stretched across centuries, unbroken, not because of human devotion but because it was woven into the fabric of existence itself. The covenant of maize was not a single act, nor a moment sealed once and forgotten. It was a rhythm, a turning wheel that guided the very breath of the Maya world. The people lived within its cycles, their days bound to the pulse of seasons, their survival tied to the great dance of rain and growth. In the time of sowing, when the earth opened to receive the kernels, the covenant stirred awake. Men prepared the soil with reverence, cutting away weeds and brush as though clearing the threshold of a temple. They cast seeds into furrows as if placing offerings upon an altar, each kernel a prayer embodied in matter. At this stage, the covenant was fragile, for the seeds lay sleeping, dependent on the tears of Chaac to awaken them. The people watched the skies with anxious eyes, their breath held as clouds gathered or dispersed, their hearts rising and falling with the fortunes of weather. Then came the time of sprouting when the first tender stalks pierced the ground. The covenant grew visible, delicate yet full of promise. Families walked among the fields with offerings of incense and food, honoring the shoots as if they were newborn children. For the stalks were not merely plants but vessels of the gods' agreement, proof that the cycle remained intact. In the time of ripening, when green stalks thickened and ears swelled heavy with kernels, the covenant grew strong. The fields became seas of life swaying beneath the wind, each stalk singing the silent hymn of balance. Children played among them, mothers wove their leaves into offerings, and men sharpened tools in preparation for harvest. The covenant, once fragile, now carried the weight of life itself. Finally came the harvest, the sacred death that was also renewal. Stalks were cut, kernels stripped, and granaries filled. Yet in this death the covenant did not end. From each ear consumed, from each kernel ground into meal, from each tortilla shared in hunger or feast, the promise endured. And as the fields were emptied, preparations began again for the next sowing. Thus, the cycle of covenant was unending, eternal, a wheel turning forever between soil and sky, life and death, hunger and abundance. The Maya did not measure time as men do now by numbers alone. Their calendar was sacred, each day carrying the essence of gods, each cycle echoing the covenant of maize. The planting, the rains, the ripening, the harvest, all were woven into the sacred count of days, ensuring that ritual aligned with cosmic order. The calendar was more than a tool, it was an image of the covenant itself. Days of sowing bore the sign of renewal, Days of rain the sign of Chaac's presence. Days of maize the sign of Yumcox's gift. Days of death the sign of sacrifice and return. Each moment of existence was inscribed into a greater pattern, reminding humanity that they did not live randomly but as part of a cosmic rhythm. Festivals marked these points in the cycle. At the onset of rains, dances were performed with masks painted blue and white, embodying the storm that fed the earth. During harvest, processions carried baskets of maize through the streets, each kernel lifted as though it were a jewel of divine origin. The people feasted not in indulgence but in remembrance, for to eat maize was to eat the covenant itself. Thus, the calendar became a living book, read not with eyes but with rituals enacted upon the earth. Through it, the covenant of maize and rain was remembered not once but daily, woven into every act of labor, prayer, and survival. Beneath the surface of the Yucatan, rivers of darkness flowed unseen, feeding the cenotes, sacred mouths of the earth. To the Maya, these were not mere wells but living beings, places where the underworld touched the world of men. They were the deepest altars of the covenant, guardians of its most ancient truths. At their edges, rituals unfolded that bound men to gods. Offerings of jade, bone, shell, and maize sank into the depths, each gift swallowed by still waters that reflected the sky. The cenote was the mediator, the vessel that carried human devotion into the realms where gods resided. When blood was spilled into those waters, it did not vanish. It merged with the covenant, returning to the cycle from which flesh itself had been formed. Legends whispered that beneath the cenotes, caverns stretched endlessly, filled with the echoes of drums, the murmur of prayers, the sighs of ancestors. To cast an offering into those depths was to send it not into silence but into the very heart of the earth, where gods weighed devotion and returned their answer in storms and harvests. Thus the cenotes were feared and revered, approached with trembling reverence, for they were not only sources of life but thresholds of judgment. Every offering cast into their depths reaffirmed the covenant, each gift a thread woven into the fabric of survival. The covenant was not distant, not abstract. It lived in the very bodies of the people, for they were themselves made of maize. Their flesh was the kernel ground into masa, their bones the stalks that reached upward, their blood the water that fell as rain. Every bite of tortilla, every swallow of atoll, was a sacrament. To eat was not only to survive but to renew the covenant with each mouthful. Mothers, grinding maize upon stone, carried out rituals as sacred as those performed in temples. Children, learning to sow seeds or fetch water, enacted ceremonies older than memory. Men, bent over fields, repeated gestures that echoed the first sowing of creation itself. All life was ritual and ritual was life. The covenant was not something to be remembered occasionally, it was something lived with every breath. Yet in this closeness lay danger. For if the people were maize and maize depended on rain, then their very existence hung upon the fragile mercy of balance. A single drought, a season of forgetfulness, could reduce them to dust. And so, though the covenant was eternal, human life within it was always trembling, fragile as a stalk swaying in the storm. When the rains had passed and the fields lay golden with the final harvest, the people would look to the horizon and listen for thunder. Even in seasons of calm, when the sky was clear and the sun stretched long shadows across the jungle floor, they believed the voice of Chaac lingered just beyond the veil of silence. Thunder was not bound to storms alone. It lived in the memory of stone, in the hollow echoes of caves, in the drums of ritual that carried his heartbeat into human ears. The eternal storm was not an event but a presence. It dwelled within the ceiba tree, whose roots touched the underworld and whose branches caressed the sky. It whispered in the wind that bent the stalks of maize, reminding men that life was a balance fragile and divine. It resided in the cenotes, whose dark waters reflected not only the faces of those who gazed into them, but also the infinite patience of gods waiting to be remembered. For Chaac was not a passing cloud nor a single bolt of lightning. He was continuity. His storm was the thread that stitched together the generations, the rhythm that outlasted the rise and fall of cities, the pulse that beat even when pyramids crumbled and villages turned to dust. His thunder was memory itself, heavy, resounding, impossible to silence. The Maya knew that Chaac's storm was more than nourishment. It was judgment. The rains fell with generosity when rituals were remembered and the covenant was honored. But when arrogance or forgetfulness clouded human hearts, the storm withdrew, leaving cracked earth and empty granaries behind. This judgment did not vanish with time. Even as empires shifted and generations faded, the storm endured, testing each cycle of humanity anew. Every drought was a reminder that life could not be owned, only borrowed. Every flood a warning that excess was as dangerous as scarcity. The storm was balance, merciless in its fairness, eternal in its law. Men could neither escape nor master it. They could only submit to its rhythm, living as keepers of a covenant older than themselves. To live in defiance of Chaac was to invite silence from the skies. To live in remembrance was to walk in harmony with thunder. Thus, even after cities fell silent and temples grew over with vines, the eternal storm remained, whispering through the jungle that men were never free from its gaze. Deep within the jungles of the Yucatan, where roots twist around stone and the air grows heavy with unseen waters, the storm has never ceased. Even when skies are clear, the jungle hums with its memory. The cicadas' cries echo like distant thunder, the calls of birds resemble lightning's cry, and the rivers murmur with the hidden speech of rain. The eternal storm hides in the mists that rise each dawn, rolling through trees like forgotten spirits. It dwells in the sudden roar of downpour that falls upon leaves, in the glimmer of lightning that dances across the canopy. In these rhythms, the people of maize recognize the breath of Chaac, not as a god who departed when unneeded, but as a force that never truly left. The jungle itself became his temple. Every branch bending beneath rain, every pool rippling with falling drops, every wind that carried the scent of storms became part of his liturgy. The eternal storm was not separate from the world. It was woven into the very fabric of existence, unending and all-encompassing. Just as the storm lived in the land, it lived also in the flesh of the people. Their blood carried water, their breath carried air, their bodies required maize that grew only through rain. Within each man, woman, and child, the storm pulsed as heartbeat and hunger alike. The eternal storm was the drum that accompanied their births, their labor, their deaths. When a child was born, it entered a world already trembling with Chaac's presence. When the young sowed maize, their sweat mingled with the rains that watered the fields. When the old died, their bodies returned to earth, where storm and soil awaited them. To be human was to be a fragment of the eternal storm. To forget this truth was to live in illusion. The Maya understood that they themselves were clouds and rain, lightning and seed, fleeting vessels of a force that never ceased. Thus, even when famine struck or drought scorched the land, they knew the storm remained, waiting to be honored, waiting to be remembered. And so it was told that Chaac did not vanish with the decline of kingdoms nor with the silence of abandoned cities. His storm outlasted stone and song alike. His voice echoed in the cenotes, where offerings still sleep in the depths. His hand moved in the rains that still fall upon fields, feeding maize that continues to sustain the children of men. The eternal storm is not bound by temples or names. It is not chained to one people nor one age. It endures wherever the balance of rain and seed is honored, wherever the fragility of men bends before the patience of gods. Even now, in the heart of the jungle, when thunder rolls and lightning cuts the sky, the covenant is remembered. Not in words, not in rituals as before, but in the simple truth that rain still feeds the earth, and maize still rises to meet it. The eternal storm speaks without ceasing, and those who listen know, Chaac remains. The eternal storm was never bound to the immediate horizon of the people of maize. It stretched far beyond the sight of their villages, beyond the lines of their fields, beyond the stone cities that rose and fell with the tides of time. It lingered over distant mountains, carrying rain to forests unseen by human eyes. It churned across the seas, where the foam of waves mirrored the thunder's restless voice. To the Maya, the storm beyond the horizon was proof that Chaac's power was not confined to their rituals alone. His domain was the whole expanse of sky, and his breath reached wherever rain touched soil. Even lands unknown, inhabited by strangers, bore the mark of his eternal rhythm. For though men named him with words of their own tongues, the storm itself required no name. It was the language of the earth, spoken in thunder, lightning, and rain. Thus the people understood that Chaac was not a god who ended with their own breath, nor a force that faded when temples fell silent. He was the eternal storm, unbroken by distance, unbound by time. The eternal storm did not dwell only in the sky and the jungle. It was inscribed into the stones of temples and the stars of the heavens. The Maya carved Chaac's image upon walls, his visage fierce and adorned with serpent jaws and the flowing streams of water. They etched his symbols upon vessels, masks, and altars, ensuring that wherever ritual was performed, the storm was present. But the storm's truest record was written in the sky. The calendar of stars, the turning constellations, the cycles of sun and moon, all bore the mark of Chaac's covenant. The people knew that when certain stars rose above the horizon, rains would follow. When others descended, drought would loom. The heavens were not distant but alive, a celestial book written by the eternal storm. Each bolt of lightning was a glyph, flashing across the sky for those who could read. Each rumble of thunder was a verse in the endless hymn of balance. Even silence, when the sky remained still and clouds did not gather, was part of the text, a pause in the eternal chant that reminded men of their fragility. Thus, both stone and star carried the memory of Chaac, ensuring that his storm would never be forgotten, even when human voices faltered. The eternal storm was not only present in life but in death. When bodies were laid to rest, whether beneath the soil, within caves, or cast into cenotes, the storm received them. The rain fell upon graves, softening the earth that cradled bones. Lightning flashed over funeral pyres, sanctifying smoke as it rose into the sky. Thunder echoed through caves where ancestors slept, reminding the living that even in silence the storm endured. Death itself was not absence but continuation of the cycle. Just as maize stalks withered at harvest only to return in new planting, so too did human life end in order to begin again. Flesh returned to soil, blood to water, breath to air. Each element was reclaimed by the storm, woven once more into the eternal balance. The Maya believed that ancestors, once released from their bodies, joined the storm. Their whispers became part of the rain, their memories lingered in the thunder, their eyes flashed in the lightning that crossed the heavens. To stand beneath a storm was to stand in the presence of countless generations, voices united into a single eternal chorus. In this way, death was never loss but transformation, the soul returning to the breath of Chaac. Yet the eternal storm was not only sound and fury. It was also silence. The Maya understood that the stillness before thunder, the heavy air before rain, was part of the same power. Silence was the breath drawn before the storm's cry, the waiting that tested men's patience, the moment of balance where life seemed to hang suspended between despair and deliverance. This silence carried its own weight. It pressed upon villages during drought, when skies remained empty and earth cracked with thirst. It lingered before lightning struck, holding men in awe of what was to come. It followed the last rumble of thunder, leaving fields drenched in quiet abundance. Silence was the shadow of the eternal storm, just as night is the shadow of day. And so, even in moments when the heavens seemed calm, the people did not believe Chaac absent. They knew that silence itself was his presence, that the storm did not vanish but waited, poised, eternal. The eternal storm found its truest dwelling in memory. Stories passed from generation to generation carried the thunder's echo. Children grew up hearing tales of Chaac's battles, of rains that saved their ancestors, of droughts that tested their devotion. Each story became another rumble in the endless sky of remembrance. Even when cities fell and temples were consumed by vines, the stories endured. Farmers, bending over fields, whispered prayers learned from their grandfathers. Women, grinding maize, told their children of the storm that gave them life. Travelers, crossing rivers and jungles, remembered the taste of rain upon their tongues. Memory preserved what stone could not. The eternal storm lived within the hearts of the people, carved not upon walls but within flesh itself. As long as maize rose from the earth and rain fell from the sky, the covenant was remembered and Chaac endured. And so the story of Chaac does not end, for gods do not vanish as men do. Cities may crumble, pyramids may sink into the jungle's embrace, and the voices of priests may fade into silence, yet the storm endures. It is not bound by stone, nor by time, nor by the fragile memory of flesh. The eternal storm still walks the earth. It rolls across the horizon when clouds gather, it flashes in the lightning that cleaves the sky, it roars in the thunder that shakes both mountain and sea. Every drop of rain is his tear, every river his breath, every harvest his gift and his judgment alike. The people of maize remain his children. Though centuries pass and generations rise and fall, they continue to eat the body of young cocks, the maize that only Chaac's tears can awaken. In every tortilla shared, in every grain ground upon stone, in every sip of water that quenches thirst, the covenant of rain and maize endures, eternal and unbroken. The eternal storm is not a memory of the past. It is the voice of the present and the shadow of the future. It whispers in the depths of cenotes, it breathes through the ceba's roots, it lingers in the silence before thunder, it awakens in the roar that splits the heavens. To stand in the storm is to stand in the presence of all who came before, all who will come after, and the God who binds them together in endless rhythm. And so, when the skies darken and thunder shakes the horizon, remember, Chaac has not departed. His covenant remains. His voice still speaks in lightning and rain. His storm is eternal as the cycle of life itself. For as long as maize rises from the earth and men look to the heavens in need, the legend of Chaac shall never end. The storm is forever. Thus ends the tale of Chaac, the Lord of Rain, whose thunder still echoes in the jungle and whose tears still feed the maize. His covenant is written in water, in earth, in the flesh of humanity itself. And though empires may fall and memory may fade, the storm endures, eternal, unbroken, alive. For Chaac is not a god of the past. Chaac is the breath of the present, and the thunder of eternity.